friends, today it's time for some more recent DNFs. So I'm trying not to fall too behind on DNFs again, like I did with the last one that was still from 2018. So I'm doing another recent DNFs today, even though I know it hasn't been long since the other one. But these are my actual 5 most recent DNFs. Well, by the time I'm filming this, by the time I'm posting this, who knows? I might have DNF'd another book. I had some really interesting DNFs this time around. The last DNF video that I did, I had like the 3 balancing the books on there. So it was kind of like, well, I just wasn't into it, so I DNF'd it. This time around, I have quite the list of things. I'm excited to talk about them in some ways. I'm not so excited to talk about them in other ways, but we're gonna talk about them regardless. So let's get into it. So first, I DNF'd Circle of Shadows by Evelyn Sky at 38%. So you can already tell I tried very hard to like this, because that is a very late DNF for me. I really tried. I gave it several chances, put it down, put it back up, but nope. It just wasn't for me. There was nothing like bad about it. I just wasn't really engaged in it at all. I thought it was just okay. I thought it was pretty boring. The world building especially, I think Evelyn Sky was like trying super hard to make this world building interesting and unique, but I don't think it was at all. I think it was very boring. I think that the magic system was not established enough. Now, a lot of people will probably come for me like, yeah, you should have read the whole book for the magic system, but like, a third into the book, I think the magic system should have been more established than it was in this book. It also had different POVs. Like, I knew that there were like, you know, 2 main characters, and I was fine with that. And I thought that it was like easy to distinguish between those 2. But then there were other POVs, and sometimes I found it very hard to distinguish. I found it very hard to understand which perspective I'm reading from, because there were no names at the beginning of the chapters. And then I also didn't really see the point. I would guess that probably the POVs are important later on in the story, and that's why they all get introduced. But at the same time, I would rather have you introduce a POV later on than give me something beforehand just to introduce them earlier, but then it's nothing important. Like, it just felt like there was no point to these POVs. And I just think that's really annoying, and that made it also really hard for me to like feel engaged, because we kept switching between those POVs, and then there were POVs in there that I didn't think were necessary. It felt very messy. Messy is the #1 word I would probably use to describe this book, and I just was not feeling it because I didn't really like the characters. I didn't really find the world building very great. I didn't really, you know, there was no magic system. And so I was like not engaged in anything. So I DNF'd it. Then I DNF'd The Cerulean by Amy Ewing. At about 40%, I skimmed a lot of the rest of the book because I wanted to kind of see where it goes. So I'm not quite sure when exactly I DNF'd it, but definitely sometime after a third into it. I definitely read at least a third of it. This was a journey, and I almost don't want to talk about it because this book has a... First of all, the book in itself was just doing nothing good, and it really was not a pleasant experience to read at all. But then also, because I called it out, I started getting some trolls on Twitter, like the whole kind of group of people who like to harass YA reviewers on Twitter when they point out problematic things. That group found me, and someone with like over 5,000 followers quote tweeted me. So that was really fun. I had to go on lock for like 48 hours. Really love that for me. I find it important to talk about it, and that's also why, even though I have deleted all of my tweets, I still have my Goodreads review up, and I will not put that down even if the trolls come for me on there too. I think it's very important to talk about this book, and I am so thankful for all of the people that have reached out to me and said that it has helped them to not pick it up, that they would have been harmed by it and stuff like that. So, The Cerulean is a book about a girl living in a sapphic utopia. So there are polyam relationships, 3 women, and they have like different positions in the relationship, and one of them will like conceive a child. This is a species that doesn't even have males, you know, there's no males in this species. And I still can't believe the story is even real and getting published still. Like, I cannot believe that this is a book that people can buy. But so the main character in this story realizes, like, she just doesn't feel like everybody else her age. Like, she is not interested in like other women, which could have been really cool. Could have been like, oh, it's an asexual protagonist, you know, or a romantic protagonist, or aro ace. Would have been completely fine with that. Really would have digged that. She's actually like the chosen one of this world, so she like kind of has to jump off this planet that she's in to like sacrifice herself to save the planet. I don't know, man. The world building would have been cool. I'm just annoyed by it because I've hated everything else. But if it hadn't had these aspects in it, I could have really liked it, because the world building was unique, absolutely. But then when this girl ends up on this other planet and she sees like a male for the first time, she's like, you know, at first she's like, oh, I get it. This is a male. Like, I've heard of it before. Let me just point out again that this is a completely different species, okay? A completely different species. At some point, she like realizes that the feelings she has and like what she feels in her body is she's attracted. She's attracted to the male. And she's like, oh my God, all this time I thought there was something wrong with me, but I was actually just attracted to males. That's what it was. So this is a straight coming out story, which like in itself, great, love that. But then we also have other POVs. One of the POVs is a girl living in this other world where our main character, you know, kind of feels attracted to this male. This character in this world is a lesbian. And the first time she talks about the fact that she's attracted to women, she talks about how she shouldn't even think about that because she might get killed for it. It was a really fun experience to read a book about a sapphic utopia where the girl from the sapphic utopia is straight and the lesbian is oppressed and might die just for thinking a woman is attractive. Really love that. It was a really good experience. Like, I had so many good feelings, you know. I was feeling like really great about it. And then also I really love that like the society where, you know, the lesbian is oppressed is like in general a very brutal society, and the planet, the sapphic utopian planet, is like this super like beautiful, wonderful utopia. Everything's going well, everything's great, and like that sapphic utopia, everybody has like super light skin, super light hair, and then the brutal world, they have brown skin, you know. So homophobia and racism, isn't that our favorite combination? This book, my friends, was something else. Truly. I don't read a lot of books where there is homophobia in there, because usually I find out about the homophobia before I pick up the book. And also sometimes homophobia is used in books because like that's just the reality of what's happening, and I often find myself not really minding it. This was the first time I genuinely felt hurt by something, because I just couldn't believe that the author thought it was just okay to write a story like this. Just like I just cannot believe this is an actual story. Let's just talk about the fact that it wasn't just the author coming up with the story like, oh, I'm just gonna publish this, here you go. This is a story that went through several people to get published. And I just cannot believe how that is even possible in 2019. It makes me sick to my stomach to think about queer teens who pick this up and have to read about this. It makes me sick to my stomach to think about straight teens picking this up and thinking that this story, this narrative is okay, because it is not okay. And it pisses me off. I cannot believe it. It makes me unbelievably angry, and that is why I was so loud about it. That is why I kept sharing it until people started harassing me for mentioning that I was hurt by it and that I don't want other people to be hurt by it. And the fact that that is even a thing, that makes it all even fucking worse. So, the Cerulean, do not recommend, and honestly, someone has called me out because I like told people like not to read it. What I mean by it is I'm telling people not to read it because especially if you're queer, you're gonna be hurt by it. And I'm telling other people not to read it because this is just not a book that should exist. I'm not trying to like actively keep you from reading it, but if you value me as a queer person, you will not read this book. And that is what I'm fucking gonna say about this. If you think this narrative is okay, you should unsubscribe. Because I can't deal with that. I cannot. I think I've rarely got this angry on my channel, but this book was something else. And I also want to say, if you're one of those people who's like, well, I just want to see for myself. How many times have people said, well, this has a really bad love triangle, blah, 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 and you were like, oh, I'm not going to pick it up then. How many times have you trusted reviewers for much simpler things? If you hear something like this and your first thought is, well, I want to see for myself, you should really, really ask yourself where it's coming from and how often you just trust a reviewer when it comes to other much simpler, much less harmful things, okay? This is just something I'm going to give to you. Just think about it. Let's continue. The next book that I DNF was Outrun the Wind by Elizabeth Temmie. I only DNF'd this at 13% into it because I just realized that I had very different expectations. I was so focused on the fact that this was warrior women in love that I didn't realize it was like based on Greek mythology, and I'm just not interested in that at all. I just do not care. The issue was that it was boring, and then knowing it's like Greek mythology, I couldn't push myself to get through it. It was the combination of those two things. But it's not a bad book or anything. I think that's probably a really good read for a lot of people. I know it's a really good read for a lot of people. A lot of my friends really, really liked it. I know it has a slow burn romance, but I also couldn't really handle the slow burn romance because that was at that point kind of the only thing that I was intrigued by. And so I just DNF'd it. Then I DNF'd Dark of the West by Joanna Hathaway at 43%. This one I really tried my hardest to love, but I got sold something that wasn't there. So I thought this was a fantasy, and it's really not. The world building is not fantasy at all. It really reads more like historical fiction. It doesn't really have any fantasy elements at all. It's actually, it feels almost more like steampunk in a way. But once again, that wasn't even my biggest issue. I went into this and I really thought the prologue was like super intriguing. It was a lot, like pretty intense. I was like, yeah, this is okay, we're starting on a real bang. It made me want to find out how we get to this point because it's foreshadowing. Then we get into the first chapter and it's just a snooze fest, and it stays a snooze fest until at least 43%. It literally deflated like a balloon. I could just see it, and it just all the air went out of it real fucking quick, and it did not come back. And then, as I said, I don't think the world building was my biggest issue. I could have been like, whatever, I'm just gonna roll with it. This is not fantasy. This is like about like steampunky elements. Like I knew it had like planes in it, so that's what I was expecting, but it has like electricity and all the things. So I was just like, why is this sold as fantasy? I don't know. Something just went wrong there, I feel like, with the marketing. But I could have rolled with that, because why I was actually picking this book up is because this was also like sold as a story, like a romance. It was definitely marketed in a way where you very much expect this to be a romantic storyline. There was no romance in the first half of the book. It just took so long for these characters to even meet up. And if you're selling a book as a romance, I want to see these characters meeting and like thinking about each other in the first half already. I mean, maybe that's just me, but if you're, as I said, if you're selling a book as a romance, like, I need some of that good development, and I cannot have these characters only meet up so late. And I think that's the issue with the synopsis as well. I think that the synopsis promises that romance that doesn't really start, at least not as far as I got into this book, and then the synopsis in general tells you too much. So there was, for example, one shocking event that happened, but I already knew about it because it was in the synopsis. So that's also where it felt really boring, because even when something shocking happened, I already knew about it because it was in a synopsis. And you might know, I don't read synopsis a lot, but for this one I did, because it was an arc. And so whether you like to read synopsis or not, they should not give that much away. So this was quite the experience, because I really, really wanted to love it, and I was really willing to give it a chance. But at some point I just realized this ain't it. And finally, I already DNF'd my first book that was on my Series 2 Marathon in 2019 list, and that is 1,000 Pieces of You by Claudia Gray. My issue with this one, first off, very interesting world building, but there was literally zero explanation for it. And I looked up reviews, there will be zero explanation for it. And like, that just feels a little bit lazy, because it's like, oh, I'm gonna come up with this world building, it has no explanation, but it's traveling through alternate dimensions, so I can just put as many worlds in there as I want to. Felt a little bit lazy. I wasn't really a fan of that, but I could have pushed through for the romance. I say this quite a lot. I am always ready to push through like bad world building, bad storyline, if the romance is good. And this one I knew would focus heavily on the romance, so I was expecting this. But what I don't get is why you would focus your book on a romance but then do not have good development for it. This has a love triangle in it, but the main character already knows both of the guys and already has feelings for definitely one and probably the other one too. So we do not get to see this development of the feelings. That's fine in a story where the romance is not the focus, but if you want the romance to be the focus and the thing for me to care about, the thing as to why I would want to continue the trilogy, then you need to give me proper development. So I was not here for that. That's not how I jive. I didn't even tell you when I DNF'd it. When did I DNF it? 38%. I probably have the page number too, but I don't know. Because I listened to most of this on audio, and I also wasn't a fan of the audiobook, I really didn't like the accents that the narrator made, especially the Russian accent. I mean, maybe I have a different understanding of what a Russian accent sounds like, but that, for me, that was not a Russian accent. I don't know what the narrator did in the story, but that definitely added to it. I wasn't a big fan of the audiobook. This could have been so good. This could have been so good, but I didn't care because I didn't get the development, and that's one of my biggest gripes. Give me insta-love. You know, like, give me them falling in love, and like, The Sun Is Also a Star, they fall in love in like less than 24 hours. But it's well written. This book didn't get the memo, so yeah, I said goodbye. And these were my 5 most recent DNFs. Let me know in general your opinions on any of these. If you've read and loved any of these, obviously tell me about it. That's always cool. That's always fine. As long as you tell me why, like, I want to understand. Except for the Cerulean, I do not want to understand. And yeah, maybe also if you DNF one of those, or maybe if you're no longer interested in picking one of those up, just any of your thoughts you have about any of these books. And yeah, I make new videos every Wednesday and Sunday with occasional reviews on Friday. So click subscribe to never miss anything and hit the little bell so you get notified as well. And thank you so much for watching. I'll guess I'll see you soon. Bye!